So, Governor, thank you very much for coming this morning.
My pleasure.
Now, this morning I got up and got dressed and didn't exercise. Did you do the same thing?
I did not. At 06 every morning, I'm at the Naval Academy and letting the midshipmen haze me. So
And aren't they a little younger and a little more fit?
they are. they are. Even though they enjoy the fact that I'm an Army guy, and so I go out there and I'm at the Naval Academy and I'm still trying to figure out. For those who have not been to the Naval Academy, if you go to inside the gym or really damn near anywhere on campus, they just have "Beat Army" plastered everywhere. And so I'm still trying to figure out why they're using taxpayer dollars for such blasphemy like that.
So, you have announced you're running for re-election.
Yeah.
Why do you want to be governor again? 4 years isn't enough?
It's not. It's not. And the thing that I realized when I first came on board was there were so many ambitions about big things that we wanted to be able to get done. And you also realize that when you are coming on this job, you are a crisis manager at every single turn and juncture at the same time. And I look at where Maryland is. I look at what we've been able to get done in just 2.5 years. And I look at the situation that we've had to deal with. And the thing that I'm really excited about is I know that in Maryland, we're just showing that there is a chance for a better way, that when we're talking about things like employment, we're watching how, and again, we can get into it about the federal and state relationships, but Maryland has gone from 43rd in the country in unemployment to now having amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country for the past 1.5 years. That we have now added on over 100,000 new jobs in the state of Maryland in 2.5 years, which is more than my predecessor added in 8. Over 30,000 new businesses have started in the state of Maryland, or we've recruited to the state of Maryland since I've been the governor. We've watched historic drops, not just in violent crime, but in property crime. We're watching new initiatives being launched. We're watching population growth happening for the first time in a long time. So we're feeling really good. I also just know that we're not done. And now is a time for us to not get, for us to not to be in a defensive posture, but I'm really excited that we're going to continue being in an offensive posture, and I think that's the thing that's going to help Maryland end up really winning the decade.
So when you ran the first time, and since you've been governor, you've spent a lot of time talking about Baltimore, and you've spent a lot of time in Baltimore.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the state? You spent a lot of time in Montgomery County, Western Maryland, Eastern Shore, or you just like Baltimore?
Yeah, no. Now we definitely spend time all across the state. I mean, one of the, I've gotten this nickname Governor Outside because we're just constantly all over the state of Maryland. We've now done 52 trips to the Eastern Shore since I've been the governor. 52 trips, a historic number of trips out to the Eastern Shore. Shout out to the Eastern Shore. We spend, the time we have spent out in Western Maryland has really been really remarkable. And I think another key component to that, for example, when I announced I was running for re-election 3 weeks ago, some of the first people to endorse me for my re-election were actually mayors and leaders, and Republican mayors and leaders in Western Maryland, who were like, this governor has shown up more here than any governor beforehand. So these were Republicans who came out and endorsed me for re-election. But I'm also unapologetic about the fact that I believe in Baltimore, and we are going to invest in Baltimore.
Okay. All right. And in running for re-election, who do you think your opponent will be?
I have no idea. They all kind of sound the same at this point.
Okay.
And honestly, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. Frankly, it didn't matter to me last time. I remember in both the primary and the general, when, take the primary, for example, there were like 15 people run for governor. There were statewide elected officials, there were Obama cabinet secretaries, the former head of the Democratic Party was running, and then me, the guy who had no political experience, the guy who had never held political office before in my life. And when people said this is really going to be difficult and really going to be tough, my answer is, but so is the job. And do you want to be able to go and take on an opportunity when we know this is not going to be simple, but we know that leadership matters? And so for me, frankly, I don't know if it's who's he? Ed Hale or Larry Hogan or Andy Harris. I don't know. I don't care. The only thing I would say to them is, I hope you come ready, because we will. Okay.
Well, let me ask you about somebody in Washington who's a Republican, the President of the United States. He's not your biggest supporter, probably.
No, he don't like me too much.
And he's talking about sending federal troops in or federalizing the National Guard to deal with the crime problems. Is that going to happen or not?
No. I mean, I do find it, there is this fetishization of military uniforms that, and again, as someone who's worn it, I also find it to be deeply offensive, because we are asking these citizen soldiers, these people who have chosen to raise their hands on behalf of us, if necessary and required, to do jobs and requirements that they are not trained up for, and frankly, pulls them away from their families, pulls them away from their jobs, and for what? And I think about what's happened in Washington, D.C., when people said there's been a drop in crimes in Washington, D.C. during this time period. I just want to remind people of this. One is, do you know where has had around the same type of drop in crimes during that same period of time? Baltimore. And we've not used the National Guard. We have not spent over $1 million a day to be able to have National Guards members. And again, and I say this with all love and respect for the members of our National Guard, the reason I would not ask them to do it is because I respect them too much. We've had the National Guard in Washington, D.C. take more selfies than make arrests. We've had them paint more fences and pick up more trash than do drug busts. They are not doing municipal policing work. And so the point is that if you want to have a serious conversation about the things we all collectively have to do to make our community safe, things that I know is my #1 priority, and I will stop at nothing to make sure that everyone in our neighborhoods are safe, I would love to have a real conversation with the president about things like lock switches.
Okay. Now, next year, I think in July, you're going to be the head of the National Governors Association.
Yeah.
And as the head of the National Governors Association, you're going to have to deal with the President of the United States. I assume from time to time they have a dinner at the White House and so forth. How is that going to be? Is that going to be easy to shake his hand and say hello to him, or not so easy?
No, listen, I don't have a personal beef with the President of the United States. Okay. But if you're coming after our people, then I'm going to have something to say about it. So my thing is, I don't want to work against the president. I want to work for the people. And I'm just finding so many of the policies that he's pushing are just deeply contradictory when it comes to supporting the people of the state of Maryland. And so, I've told the people of my state, I will work with anyone. I will just bow down to no one.
Right. Now, you were raised largely by a single mother.
Yeah.
She lives here. Does she call you with advice from time to time?
She does all the time. I mean, it's still mom. It's still mom. But you know, it's funny. I remember once we had a funny conversation where she called me up and she's like, listen, can you do me a favor? She's like, don't raise my taxes.
What'd you say?
And I told her, I said, Mommy, let me tell you, with what we put together, if your taxes go up, you are doing very, very well in the state of Maryland. But I had to explain it, because one thing I show is that I'm really proud of the fact that how we've been able to have a real sense of fiscal discipline within the state, but say you can still invest in bold results where, again, for the middle class in our state, the middle class just got a tax cut. That since I've been the governor, there has been no raising of property taxes. There's been no raising for income tax for middle class families. That the people who got a tax increase, frankly, are people who are doing very, very well. And so the thing I told my mom, I said, Mom, if your taxes go up, trust me, I'm not shedding a tear for you and your situation right now.
All right. What about the bridge? When is the bridge going to be completed?
So my commitment is that I want this bridge completed during our time. And the thing that and I've been so deeply impressed by the historic recovery that this state has put on. And it wasn't just the historic recovery when it comes to clearing the federal channel. Again, when they said it would take 11 months, we got that thing cleared in 11 weeks. It wasn't just the historic permitting process. A permitting process for a bridge of that size, and people remember, the Key Bridge is around 2 miles long. Permitting on that bridge alone can take years. We got it done in months. If you look at maybe one of the closest comparisons that we have, which is probably like the Gordie Howe Bridge, the Gordie Howe Bridge, that permitting for the Gordie Howe Bridge took 4 years. Gordie Howe, they've been working on that bridge for close to 20 years, and it's still not done. The commitment that we have is we are going to move with the same level of intensity and the same level of urgency to be able to get that bridge done, that I want to be the one to be able to cut that ribbon, to be the first ones to walk across that bridge. And the thing why I think that becomes really important, and where even things like the partnership with Washington matters, is the cost share is a really important component to this. That we are currently in litigation with the ship owners, because again, bridges don't just fall. 2 mile, ships the size of 3 football fields that have lost their power for the multiple times in that time period, slam into the bridge. That's what causes that bridge to collapse.
How do you prevent that from happening in the future? Some other ship could lose its way. Is there some way to deal with that in the future with a new bridge?
There is, and what we're going to do with this bridge is, one thing that we know is that when the Key Bridge was built in 1975, before I was born, they had all the specific safety modifications and everything that were then put in place. We know that the new bridge has got to be a bridge that can withstand and deal with any type of tragedy, catastrophe, where safety is going to be the number one priority for the rebuild of this bridge.
And the name of the bridge is still going to be the Key Bridge?
Yeah, I'm not having any debate about that.
Okay. All right, so let me ask you about what it's like to be governor. How is it different than what you expected? You had a number of CEO positions before.
Yeah.
How is this job better, and why is it such a great job to have? I mean, don't you have to be on call all the time, and you don't get paid a lot of money for doing this? Why do you like this job?
I love this job because we're able to fulfill our promises. This really is the greatest job. I'm being very clear, and I'm not saying this disrespectfully to anyone who's in other roles, but I would never go to Washington. I have no desire to be a senator or a congressperson or whatever like that. They're not even working right now, so it's
so no job in Washington.
Well, no, and no job in Washington, because it's like I love what I do, and I think about why we got in this work in the first place, where the people know that I am obsessed with ending child poverty. And I just think that no civilized society can call themselves civilized when you allow this many children to grow up in poverty and to have their future determined before they even have a say. You're not a civilized society. But I remember when I was running one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in the country before I ran for governor, and I was working with a former governor on the issue of the child tax credit and things we could do to make to really eliminate child poverty. And I told him he should write it in his State of the State address. I get advance copy. There's nothing in there about the child tax credit, nothing in there about child poverty. And so I was really pissed off, and so I called up the head of policy for the organization I run. And after 5 minutes of ranting, I finally breathed, and he said to me, listen, we've worked for 6 months to try to get him to include a line in the speech. But what if you could write the whole speech? And that was the point. And so I remember in my first State of the State address that I gave to the people of Maryland, we probably talked about 13 minutes about child poverty. We talked about how we're going to make permanent the child tax credit, how we're going to have an enhanced earned income tax credit, how we were going to raise the minimum wage, how we were going to invest in early childhood education, how we were going to support mental health services, how we're going to give people a new track on life and doing things like the 175,000 pardons, the largest mass pardon in the history of the United States of America, giving people a second chance at employment and a second chance at life. I am serious about this. And the thing I love about governor is you can go all around the state of Maryland and make this argument, and to see how the argument sticks with people, and that's exciting.
So you came here from Annapolis. You left a little late, and did you have to speed? And do you have to ever worry about getting a traffic ticket when you don't have that problem?
No, I do. We generally try not to speed. We don't like using all the lights and stuff. But I try to stay away from tickets. But I know somebody who can pardon if I get one.
So let me ask you about the 250th anniversary of the country. We're going to celebrate that next year. What is Maryland doing to kind of mark the 250th anniversary? Anything?
Yeah, I'm super excited about what I think is not just the anniversary of this country, but it's going to be a celebration of Maryland, and it's going to be a celebration of Maryland's role in this country. That this country's history is large, and it's uneven. And that's one thing I want for this 250th to remember, is that this is not a masking of history. We want to really tell the history of this country, tell the history of this state, talk about its celebrations, talk about its losses, talk about the contributions, talk about the things that we didn't get right. Because I believe that this country is worth celebrating. I also believe that loving your country does not mean lying about its history. And so I think that there has to be an ability to do both. And we're going to talk about the contributions of the state of Maryland. We're also going to talk about the fact that the Mason-Dixon line runs through our state, right? We're going to talk about the contributions of people like a Harriet Tubman and a Frederick Douglass, but we're also going to talk about why Maryland had to be the place to give birth to a Harriet Tubman and a Frederick Douglass, about the fact that our state flag, which I still think is one of the most beautiful state flags in the country, is so unique because it's actually a combination of a Union symbol and a Confederate symbol, just highlighting the complexity of the place that we call home. And so I'm really excited about our ability to be able to showcase American miniature. I'm really excited about our ability to showcase what makes this state and this country so special. But I really want this also to be a lesson of history for the people of the state as well.
So when I was a young man, my hair turned gray. What happened to your hair? Did it turn gray or?
No, can I tell you actually a true story? So I got sent to military school when I just became a teenager, like 13, 14 years old. And so I started shaving my head around that time. When I went to Hopkins and when I went to Oxford, and there's actually pictures of this, of me where I decided at that point I'm gonna grow my hair back out. So I grew out an afro, I had plaits, I had braids, I was able to braid my hair and everything like that. And then I started noticing my braids had to get much, much tighter. And then, so when I went back to the Army, I shaved my head again, and then from that point on, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let this thing go from here on out. So I just rock from this.
Your hair might be gray, you don't know.
It could be. I don't want to take that test. I'm good. I'm good.
So today, tell us what your typical day is. You get up in the morning, you exercise. Suppose you don't exercise one day, will you get flabby all of a sudden if you miss one day or something?
No, but you feel it. I mean, for me, honestly, working out at the Naval Academy is as much mental health as anything else.
Okay.
Because it's one of the only times during the day where you're not connected to a device, you don't have a briefing, it's just you. It's just you, and it's whatever masochistic obstacle they have in front of me that they then have me going over. But I love it because it really is as much mental health for me as anything else.
So when you finish that, you go back and you have breakfast later?
I'm not a big breakfast guy.
Oh.
My breakfast is generally, and I know this is not good, I'm not encouraging this, but my breakfast is generally like coffee, water, like
Okay.
I'm not a big
then when you go to the office, or how many speeches do you typically have to make a day?
A lot of it depends on, the beautiful thing about the job is every day is going to be different. Where there are some days where you're going to go from event to event. There's some days where I'm just working with my performance cabinet and working with my cabinet secretaries on issues. There's certain days where we're just like in the community. And so it really, every day is going to be different. We're, but one thing which I think why it really does matter that we do spend our time outside is that in many ways is where we get our energy from. Perfect example, I remember when one of the first trips that I took as governor, I believe it was day 2 or day 3, I was on the phone with the mayor of Lonaconing over in Western Maryland. And he was having a water crisis, and they're having a boil water advisory. And I'm on the phone, I said, you know what, Mayor, I'm on my way. And so we mobilized, and we headed over to Lonaconing. And when he saw me, he said, Governor, do me a favor. Turn to 360 degrees. And I turned, and he said, the only guarantee I can give you is you ain't see a Democrat within 5 miles of anywhere that you just looked. But he said, but you're the first governor that's been here since 1996. And I love my people. I love Marylanders, and so just getting out.
Have you been to every county?
Oh yeah, we've been to every county multiple times at this point.
Okay, all right, so during the day, you have aides advising. You ever lose your temper and yell at them, or you always seem to be smiling? But do you get mad? How do you get mad? Do you throw something, or do you curse them out, or what do you do when you get mad?
No, I try not to do assaults as a strategy. Here's the thing. I think, and the team knows, I have a very high bar for excellence. I expect a lot of them. And the one thing I love about the team is these are people who give a lot. Like, these are people who 100-hour weeks are not uncommon if you work for our administration. We burn hard.
Right.
I definitely am someone who, I do have a high bar, a high expectation, and I am someone who, if you're not hitting it, I will be clear with you about that. You're not hitting the bar. But I'm not one who believes that the people and the leaders who spend their time yelling and screaming, that to me doesn't mean you're effective. If you're a leader who spends all of your time yelling and screaming, it doesn't tell me you're effective. It tells me you've lost control. And I'm someone who very deeply believes that, people hear me loud and clear when I tell them what needs to get done. But if I'm flipping out every 30 seconds, that doesn't mean that I'm effective. It actually means that you're actually very ineffective in what you do.
Okay, so at the end of the day, you go home to the governor's mansion.
Yeah.
You and your wife, you have dinner together.
We
do
do.
You have to have dinner out every night, or you can have some nights you can just be home for the two
No,
of you?
and that's the thing. What we really try to do with all of this is we try to make sure that our family is as unaffected as possible.
But your kids call you governor, or what do they? No? They don't?
I couldn't even imagine if I tried to get them to do that, what they would say. No, but it's funny. I remember talking with as part of the NGA, and so one of the things I love about being, now I was just as David mentioned, just elected by my peers to be the vice chair for the NGA, and I'm the chair-elect. So next year I'll be the chair of the National Governors Association. And the great thing about it is, thank you. And the great thing about it is that it's Democratic and Republican governors. We all work together. We don't always agree on everything. But there is a sense of partnership and cooperation that I absolutely love, because this is about finding best practices wherever they might hide themselves, and the things that are working in Maryland that are best practices, saying like, let's share that and scale that for the rest of the country. And so I remember one of the first conversations I had at what they call Baby Governor School, which is all the new governors get together with the more seasoned governors. Speaking of my mom, she asked me what grade I got on Baby Governor School. I was like, it's not a real school, Mom. But I was talking with Phil Murphy, who's the governor of New Jersey. And we got a Jersey in over here? Okay. Hey now, Jersey. And so Phil was like, where do you think about your kids going to school? And I told him, yeah, we have to move to Annapolis, and so we're looking someplace in Annapolis. He said, can I give you one piece of advice? And I said, absolutely. He said, whatever your kids are doing, don't change it. He said, their friends are their friends. Everything that's going to happen from here on out is going to come with a context in them. And you don't want them to grow spiteful towards that context. And so really what we tried to do is, there's in the same after-school programs, daughter's still in her same dance troupe. Our son is still playing baseball and Little League Baseball.
Did they ask you for help with their homework, or no?
Absolutely. I was helping my son with homework last night. It's funny because, but one thing is interesting is, I'm really more of a quantitative thinker than a qualitative. Like, words are much more difficult for me than numbers. And so whenever he's doing kind of like, the math stuff, it's a bit simpler for me to be able to.
But can't you just go to ChatGPT and get the answers?
You actually could, but the thing that I really want for us as a state to spend some time on as well is I'm very bullish about these various technology aspects. I'm very bullish about what they can mean. I personally think things like when you're looking at how AI, I believe it has a way of transforming education and healthcare in some really interesting and powerful ways. I also want to be very clear that we have to make sure that the guardrails are in place, and we have to make sure that the things that increase technology and technological investments that the state is going to make cannot make up for the humanity that we must protect, that we must invest in, and that we've got to be able to nurture, which continues to make us and our children the most unique, the unique characters around.
How much of your time do you spend trying to attract companies to Maryland to relocate here, build facilities here, reincorporate here? Is that a major part of what you're doing?
Huge part of my job. I would say if you were to look at a pie chart of my days, a significant portion is just going out, meeting with CEOs, speaking with them. In fact, just last week, I spent a day up in Boston talking to a couple biotech companies about relocating to the state of Maryland. And we've been excited that we've been able to see the kind of momentum that we need. We're watching Home Chef coming in and bringing in 500 new jobs. AstraZeneca just announced a massive expansion down in Montgomery County. We're watching the work that's happening in Frederick. So there's the economic activity that's happening in Maryland is exciting, but it's for this reason too. Is the things I'm obsessed with is we've got to get our economy focusing on growth, and we've got to get our economy focusing on diversification. And if you look at what's happened, and just take a look at the Trump administration, they've now fired over 15,000 federal workers who are Marylanders alone. That since this administration has come on board, we've watched federal contracts canceled. We've watched grants pulled away. We've watched how federal disaster aid relief going to Western Maryland, which was justified, quantitatively justified, was denied with just a simple phrase saying support for Maryland is not warranted. That we've seen how the President of the United States in a press conference, without conferring with anybody, somehow said, well, yeah, and the FBI is not going to Maryland because Maryland is a liberal state. Like the assault that we have now had on the state of Maryland has been aggressive, has been intentional, it's been petty, it's been partisan, and it's been punishing. That's the approach that this administration has taken with the state of Maryland, with me as its governor, and it is what it is. The thing that we know, though, is this, that the only way that you can go, despite all that, the only way that you can go from 43rd in the country in unemployment to now having a year and a half of amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country, the only way that the state of Maryland can now have an unemployment rate of 3.6% right now, which is almost a full point lower than the national average, the only way that those things can become real is because the private sector has been helping to lead the charge. That it's innovative companies, innovative businesses, entrepreneurial growth that's been able to help to continue to spurn the type of economic activity that we need. And so that's when I say, us being able to center our portfolio and our balance sheet on our lighthouse industries, life sciences, IT, and that includes AI, quantum, cyber, aerospace and defense, the unique places that Maryland has a unique and competitive advantage in, those are the places that we've got to be able to invest, where we've got to be able to grow, and we've got to be able to diversify off of Washington, D.C., because as I'm continuing to see from my vantage point, Washington, D.C. is functionally broken. And we've got to make sure that our economy and our people are going to be good, regardless of what we're seeing from our neighbors down south.
So you were in the financial service world for a while, and had you stayed in it, you could be doing something important like private equity. Have you ever looked back and regretted the fact you're not in private equity and just being a governor?
No, and listen, I did really well in the world of finance. Like I was being promoted quickly, and I got a lot out of it. The truth is that I use the things that I learned when I was working in finance every day right now, because it's just kind of how my brain works as well. I believe if you really want to understand policy, understand budgets. because that's all policy is. It's budgeting, right? It's prioritizing, it's what are you going to invest in, it's what are you not going to invest in. It's a budgetary exercise. But I remember that, when I was working, I think at Citi at that point, and I was doing banking over at Citi. And I remember thinking to myself that I'm actually pretty good at this. I just don't love it. And having to compete with people who are doing something that they love when you don't is just challenging. And there was actually a song, it's actually interesting. There was a song by Lauryn Hill, who's a hip hop artist. I think put together one of the greatest albums, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, that I've ever heard in my life. But she had a song on there, it was a title track, it was number 15. And and in the song, it said, and every time I tried to be what someone else thought of me, so caught up I wasn't able to achieve. But deep in my heart, the answer, it wasn't me. So I made up my mind to define my own destiny. And I remember listening to that song on repeat when I was working at Citi. And that was also around the same time, I think it was probably a couple months later, that I went into my boss and I told him, I think I'm ready to leave. And that's when I decided to chart my own destiny.
So when you were thinking of running for governor, you told your mother that, and what did she say?
She laughed. Well, you know what's funny is that I think I'm someone who, once I'm committed to where I am or what I want to do, I'm pretty difficult to move off of. Perfect example, when people said, why do you want to run, why do you want to be a politician? I was like, I want to be the governor. Because governor's a really unique role. You're the chief executive of the state. And I remember when Elijah Cummings was a mentor of mine. And I remember after he passed, I had people who were close to Elijah who said, listen, would you consider running for his seat? And I kind of thought about it, but I was like, that's not, and I love Elijah Cummings, but that's not how I would want to honor his legacy. It's not what I do. There was nothing that anyone could have said to me to convince me to run for Congress. Fast forward a few years later, when I decided that I wanted to run for governor. And I had a whole bunch of people saying, this is a horrible idea. This is not going to go well. You are not going to win. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. There's nothing that anyone could have told me not to run. I was locked in. And so I very much look at it from that perspective where, and when you ask, what did my mom say? My mom knows her son. She knew that once I had locked in on my why, what were we going to do? Why did this moment matter? And why did being in the arena matter, specifically in this moment? Right. She knew that there was going to be no moving me off of it.
So one thing I never understood about your career is, being selected as a Rhodes Scholar, only 32 every year, maybe the highest honor you can get as a college student. You get to be a Rhodes Scholar, you go to Oxford, and then usually people come back, they go to law school, business school, medical school, all things like that, maybe even run for office. But you decided to go into the military in combat. Were there a lot of Rhodes Scholars going into combat at that time?
What
did your mother say about that?
Yeah, she had a lot of opinions about that one, though. That was, I remember when I first joined the Army, we weren't a nation at war. I mean, I first joined the Army in 1996. And it was there were conflicts going on, but frankly, for Army guys, especially for folks who just joined, were infantry, combat arms, all that kind of stuff. That really wasn't our wars that were taking place. And I remember it was on 9/11 that less than 2 weeks after 9/11 was when I actually flew to Oxford for the Rhodes Scholarship. So I got the Rhodes Scholarship before 9/11 happened. And I remember having the conversation with some of my military folks, my commanding officers, when I felt very torn about the fact that I was getting ready to head off to England on this scholarship, but at the same time, the guys who I served with, they're not getting ready to deploy, to respond. And I remember the folks, my commanding officer said, listen, we know we know where you are. Go finish your education, but trust me, we know where to find you. And, but I always had this kind of, this feeling of where there was a lack of, there was something incomplete for me, where even after I finished up my time at Oxford and had a great experience there, I now had people who I trained with, people who I did jump school with, people who, we were all in the heat together, who are now on their second and their third deployments. And I was not. And I remember that was when I got a call from the person who ended up becoming my deputy brigade commander in Afghanistan. When he called me and he said to me, he said, when are you going to get in the fight? And it was so indicting.
But you were in combat?
I was, yeah. Once I deployed.
Once you went to combat, and
yeah.
anybody ever shoot at you?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. In our first days, because I remember when I first got deployment orders that we were going to Afghanistan, where I remember the consistent thing I heard from people was, well, thank God it's not Iraq. Because remember, at that time, Iraq, I think we had 150,000 soldiers in Iraq. At that time, I think we had like 16 or 17,000 in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was kind of like a war that no one was talking about. And to have 16, 17,000 soldiers for an AO, for an area of operations of that size, is still wild to me. But then when we got over there, in our first days, the first days, when you had fire, both direct and indirect fire coming in, that was, and during the time there, I think we set a record for the amount of rocket attacks, et cetera, that our FOB was taking. You realize just very, very quickly that it wasn't that there wasn't fighting going on, it's that it wasn't being reported.
But
and we learned that in the first
consider asking for a desk job when you went into the military? You didn't want to do that?
No, it's not, and I'm not taking, listen, and anyone who is willing to put on the uniform of this country, anyone who is willing to say goodbye to their family, anyone who is willing to being willing to pay the highest price to be called American if asked. I don't care what your MOS is, I don't care what your responsibility is, you forever and for life will have my utmost respect and will always have my utmost support. And I do know that, yeah, there were definitely people who probably took on more transferable skills than what we did. But I also know that even as the combat arms folks, and even as the folks who were outside the wire, as we say, right. Do you know who we needed every single day to do our jobs? The cooks. We needed the combat engineers. We needed the JAG officers who were taking care of your legal work. We needed the admin folks who'd make sure your paperwork wasn't getting lost. So every single mission, I think we learned that yes, you're gonna have the outside the wire guys, but also in order for the outside the wire guys to do what they did, you needed to have everyone else who might not have been outside the wire, who knew their job and who were doing it really well in order for your mission to be successful.
Now, we haven't talked about the First Lady of Maryland. Where did you meet her?
We actually met, we say it's like an arranged marriage because we actually met through family. So her aunt and uncle had met my aunt and uncle. And they were talking and they were like, oh, they mentioned something how my niece, she works in Maryland. My Dawn, our state's first lady, my bride, she used to work for Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. When she was a lieutenant governor, she actually eventually became the chief of staff for Anthony Brown when he was lieutenant governor nominee. So she actually knows a whole lot more about like Annapolis than I ever did. And I really, it was amazing, her explaining me the difference between government house, state house. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. But they first learned about each other, and they're like, oh, our niece works in Maryland, and da-da-da. And then my aunt and uncle was like, it's so funny, our nephew, he is, he's from Maryland, and he actually just got a Rhodes Scholarship, and da-da-da. So they're like, you guys should meet. At first, when we first met, they're like, hey, will you please meet the niece of our friend, and I was like, fine. And then I was like, all right, I was like, here's what I'll do, coffee. And I give this to all like young folks I talk to, total cheat code. The best first date is coffee. It's cheap, and you can be out of there in 15 minutes if you need to be. So I'm like, let's do coffee. So I go and I pick her up from her house to take her to coffee, and as soon as she opened the door, I was like, oh, hey. Then my voice got real deep. I was like, my name is Wes Moore.
Said, you're a Rhodes Scholar.
I'm a Rhodes Scholar. And then we went out for coffee, and that coffee literally turned into, eventually went for dinner, and we went dancing, and turned into like a 5-hour date. And I just, very quickly, she just absolutely became my best friend. Very quickly, she just became the person who was just completely indispensable in my life. And then very quickly, as it turned into that, I started making my moves to say, what do you think about us going out? Actually, and then getting and actually dating. And so that was the transition.
And she didn't want anybody with hair. She didn't care about that.
No, it's funny. She said, you should actually talk to her about this because she's actually very good. She was actually the person, when we first met, I actually had, that was during my afro and hair braiding phase. And she was one of the first people to say, let it go, let it go.
So final question for you. Your highest priority in the next term is to ensure the Orioles win a World Series. Is that right?
That is exactly right.
All right.
That is exactly right.
Okay, so you're going to make sure that happens. Okay. Governor, you've been a good sport, and thank you for coming here. And
well, can I say one thing? I'm sorry. In addition to the Orioles winning the World Series, and not to say winning the World Series, multiple World Series, which we are very, very excited about. It also goes into the larger renaissance of Baltimore. And that's what I'm so excited about. Where, let's remember, when we first came on board, 2.5 years ago, the Inner Harbor was in receivership. Baltimore was averaging about a homicide a day. The Baltimore Orioles were months away from not having a lease. There was still massive uncertainty about the second leg of the Triple Crown, Preakness. We did not have a plan for State Center, a huge and important piece, invaluable piece of real estate that sits within the city. Like, there were so many question marks. And I was very clear that if you want to have a thriving state, the state's largest city must also be thriving. Yeah. And it's not because I'm a homer. It's because I'm really good at math. It's just a math equation, right? And so when you think about where we are right now, just 2.5 years in, right? We've got now where the last time the homicide and violent crime rate in Baltimore was this low, I wasn't born yet, that we actually now have a plan for the downtown and the Inner Harbor. And by the way, the developer is a guy who grew up in West Baltimore to be able to develop the harbor, that we now have plans for State Center, that we now are doing, oh, by the way, another thing we didn't mention, Baltimore had over 17,000 vacant homes when we first came on board. And now in just 2.5 years, the number of vacant homes has now been decreased by around 20%, with a plan that over the next 13 years, we will completely eliminate all vacant homes from the city of Baltimore. Like, it's the third best place for young college graduates. It's got the 7th fastest growing economy. And yes, we have a brand new partner and a brand new lease with the Baltimore Orioles, which is going to be a key point for the larger build out of the entire downtown extended corridor. My point is this: we're on the move. And in order for this to be Maryland's decade, it's got to be Baltimore's time. And in order for that to be able to happen, we've got to make sure that we're moving in partnership. And that's the thing I think I'm most proud of. It's not just the what has happened in the past 2.5 years, it's the how. And the how is together. And that's the thing we got to stay committed to and continue to push on in this next future.
So let me suggest your re-election theme should be just simply more.
There you go. I love it.
Okay?
I love it.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.